So a little while ago, one of my buddies sent me an article that was the top rated episodes of SpongeBob according to IMDb. And that gave me the idea of talking about the top rated episodes of the original run of Yu-Gi-Oh! The first 5 seasons, colloquially referred to as Duel Monsters. According to IMDb, these are the highest rated by users. Now, the ratings are weighted. So some of these ratings, if I consider the unweighted ratings, the rankings would be a little different. And there were a lot of ties, especially near the bottom half of the top 10. And in order to sort of break those ties, I considered the episodes with more reviews, but the same rating, to be higher on the list than episodes with less reviews and the same rating. So we're going to jump right into it. Now, it has been a very long time since I've seen the show, and there are still a lot of things about the show that I don't remember all that well, but we're going to try and muscle through this, all right? So, starting off with number 10, we have In the Name of the Pharaoh, Season 5, Episode 35. Now, this is one of the episodes that was part of a tie. It was a 3-way tie, and this one received the fewest number of reviews of the 3. So, In the Name of the Pharaoh is where Yugi and Kaiba have to defeat Zork, and they find that they can't. In order to do so, Yugi has to find out the Pharaoh's real name, but he's having a difficult time because he can't read ancient Egyptian. I don't remember how this plot gets resolved. All I know is that throughout this entire arc, the whole dark RPG arc, a lot of stuff that's set up early on in Duel Monsters is paid off here at the end. And one of those things is Pharaoh getting his memories back and learning that his real name is Atem. So I don't remember if this is the episode where he figures out what his name is, or if this episode ends on a cliffhanger and then he finds out in the next episode. I imagine, since this episode is one of the more highly rated episodes from this arc, that this is probably the episode where he figures out what his name is. Coming in at number 9, we have Season 3, Episode 33, Clash in the Colosseum. So in this episode, this is part 2 of a multi-part episode. And this is the duel between Yugi and Kaiba, I believe, in the Battle City, if I'm not mistaken. Because I think Season 3 is Battle City. I could be wrong. Kaiba has XYZ Dragon Cannon on the field, and all Yugi has to defend himself is a Queen's Knight. So Yugi has to find a way to stop Kaiba from summoning his God card, and he has to summon his God card first. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, he has the ability to summon King's Knight and Jack's Knight, and then tribute all 3 of them for, I think his god was Slifer the Sky Dragon at this point. So he's able to summon Slifer before Kaiba has a chance to summon Obelisk, and then he wins. And I believe this is the point where Yugi gets access to Obelisk the Tormentor. So that probably has a lot to do with why this episode is very highly rated. Because if I'm not mistaken, this is either the episode where he gets Obelisk or the episode where he summons Slifer, or both. Which would make this episode one of the more exciting and dynamic episodes from that stretch, from that arc. So next up, we have yet another Season 3 episode. Season 3, Episode 44, The Final Face-Off, Part 4. Now, a lot of these episodes are a part of a multi-part episode. I think the only one that isn't is the number 10 slot in the Name of the Pharaoh. So all of the rest of these are going to be, some part of a multi-part episode. And I'm not considering all of the parts as one singular entry. I've considered each part individually. If I consider them all uh, as a joint episode, like considered part 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., all as one, I would probably average the scores. But I think doing it this way kind of allows for a little bit more, granular discussion about things. So the final face-off part 4, even with the infinite attack strength of Obelisk, Yugi still can't defeat the Winged Dragon of Ra. With Yugi at the end of his ropes and the maniacal Merrick waging all-out war, can Merrick's oldest friend reach Merrick in time to help him come to his senses before his insanity overwhelms him? So this is the final part, and I believe the final episode of season 3, if I'm not mistaken. No, there is more to it. But this is the final of Battle City, which pits Yami Merrick, the evil version of Merrick, against Yugi. And much like a lot of other episodes where Yugi faces off against one of the big baddies, this episode is probably one of the best remembered among the original run of Yu-Gi-Oh! For a lot of people, Battle City is probably their favorite, saga or arc, whatever you want to call it, within the larger Duel Monsters, series, if you want to call it that. So, of course, the finale is going to have some representation on this list. And again, this is yet more build-up for what is going to come in Season 5. The Dark RPG, the reveal for the Pharaoh, and all that kind of stuff. So, in this fight specifically, Merrick has the ability to summon the Winged Dragon of Ra. We've seen in previous episodes some of the rare hunters have counterfeit Ra, and when they try to summon it, it causes huge problems. In this, Merrick has the original Ra, and he knows the chant in order to summon it. So he's able to get it out on the field. Yugi is able to bring out Obelisk, and there's a face-off. But obviously, it can't just be he summons Obelisk, Obelisk is stronger than Ra, they win, right? Because in addition to this, he also has, if I'm not mistaken, it's a shadow duel where normal Yugi and normal Merrick are basically dying more and more as the evil version of Merrick and the Pharaoh version of Yugi duke it out and lose life points. And you can see at one point that when Merrick finally does summon the Winged Dragon of Ra, he sacrifices all but one of his life points in order to power up Ra, even though doing so basically depletes his normal version's life force. So that sort of sets up for the type of person that Merrick is, and really kind of sets the stakes for the entire thing. And I believe all that happens in this episode. And then we get to the next one, number 7, which is part 5 of the final face-off, season 3, episode 45. Yeah, because this is the finale of the Battle City tournament. And this is the episode where, one, Yugi, the Pharaoh version, is able to sort of mount a comeback, but also the normal version of Merrick is able to swap positions with the evil version of Merrick, and he is able to take over the duel, and the evil Merrick is the one whose life force depends on the outcome of the duel and how many life points they have. And I don't remember if Merrick scoops necessarily, but he basically hands Yugi the victory at that point because he no longer wants the evil version of himself to exist. So that's sort of how that whole thing plays out. So it makes sense that those two would be on this list and that the second part or the last part of that finale would be the one that ranks higher. So number 6 is The Fate of the Pharaoh Part 3. And the plot summary, all it says is Yugi defeats Raphael's guardians. So this is part of season 4, the Orichalcos arc. The Orichalcos saga is filler. None of it was in the manga. It was all created as a means of sort of artificially extending the life of the anime so that Takahashi could have more time to finish the final season of Yugioh in the anime. So the Orichalcos arc isn't technically canon, but among fans, it is one of the best remembered arcs or sagas it's one of the best remembered arcs in the Duel Monsters saga because there's a lot of great moments. And this is not the moment that I think I would have specifically chose to put on this list. Probably the most famous moment is when the Pharaoh duels against Weevil and does the whole draw Monster Cardo bit. I believe this one, though, is Yugi getting revenge against Raphael for taking normal Yugi's soul, right? Because this one is part 3 of The Fate of the Pharaoh. And at this point, Yugi basically isn't in the story. Pharaoh's basically the only one there. This is pretty early on in the show. I could be wrong about this. But Atem, who they don't know he's Atem yet, but I'm going to call him Atem. Atem has basically lost Yugi, basically due to his own hubris, right? Because he basically allowed the Orichalcos to like take control of him to a certain extent, which really makes this arc of the anime very interesting because it mirrors the way that the grandpa was taken originally, but it takes away the dynamic between Yugi and the Pharaoh and forces the Pharaoh to try and fight his way through the arc, basically on a war path to try and save normal Yugi. So I can see why a lot of people like this, and the idea of the Orichalcos is a very interesting concept. The way that like activating this card makes it where the loser loses their soul. That's insane. So I can see why people really like this arc. But interestingly enough, this is the only episode from that arc that makes it into the top 10. So bear that in mind. So coming in, we're now at the halfway point. We have now entered the top 5. So at number 5, we have Clash in the Coliseum Part 3. So we had Part 2 in the 9 slot. Now we're in Part 3. So at this point, he has successfully summoned Obelisk. Kaiba has successfully summoned Obelisk, and Obelisk has to fight against the Wing Slifer the Sky Dragon. So at this point, again, this is where Yugi is able to defeat Kaiba once again, but because of the rules of Battle City, Kaiba has to hand over Obelisk. Now, all of this is in service of getting Yugi all 3 Egyptian gods. So the prophecy early on is set up that Merrick has Ra, Kaiba has Obelisk, to the point where Merrick's sister, Ishizu, actually gives Kaiba Obelisk, and then Yugi has Slifer, which he wins off of a rare hunter early on in Battle City. So Yugi now has to fight his way through Kaiba and Merrick in order to get all 3 of the Egyptian gods. And if you've seen the movie, you know that once he has all 3 gods, but in the anime anyway, he is unbeatable. Like, they're some of the most powerful cards in the game at that point. So the individual god cards are sort of meant as MacGuffins to a certain extent. once you get them, you basically have guarantees that you can beat certain people along the way. But there's no guarantee that somebody with a god card will be able to beat another person with a god card, because there's no hierarchy of power among them. They're all sort of like powerful in their own ways. They don't counter each other. So when they face off against each other, it really comes down to who's the better duelist. And at the end of the day, the show wants you to believe that Yugi is the best duelist out of all of them. So of course he's going to come out on top if he has a god card. And at this point, this is where he gets his second god card. And that will help him as he fights his way to Merrick through the rest of the Battle City tournament. Now that we've entered the top 4, this is where things start to get a little hairy. So I mentioned that each part is going to be its own entry. But the problem is that now we have entered into a situation where the entire top 4 are the 4 parts of the series finale, or saga finale, whatever you want to call it. So part 4, or slot 4, is part 1 of the final duel, which is season 5, episode 37, and number 1 is part 4. So we'll just go ahead and talk about the Dark RPG and how that led into the final duel between Yugi and Atem. So Yugi has helped the Pharaoh figure out his real name. It's Atem. He's revived his memories. But at this point, Yugi now feels like if the Pharaoh goes away, is he going to be as good of a duelist as he was when the Pharaoh was with him? Because you look at the early days, and Yugi had very little confidence in his abilities as a duelist, and really very little confidence in himself as a person. And this is basically Yugi's chance to prove that he doesn't need the Pharaoh to have confidence, to be a good duelist, and to feel good about himself. So this duel is basically there so that Yugi can, without any sort of like external help or anything like that, defeat the Pharaoh and prove that he didn't need the Pharaoh, or at least doesn't need the Pharaoh anymore. Basically going on the whole like the student becoming the teacher thing. And this duel takes a long time, and there's a lot of twists and turns over the course of it. So part 1 is the start of the duel. And then parts 2, 3, and 4 is basically Yugi proving that he doesn't need the Pharaoh. So Atem not only is perceived as the better duelist, he is also seen as somebody who can wield the god cards. Which he does. He has the god cards, and he summons all 3 of them in the duel against Yugi. But Yugi is still able to beat him, even though Atem is seen as a better duelist, and he's able to use the strongest cards in the game. So the entire point of this duel is basically Yugi proving that he doesn't need the Pharaoh anymore. Not to say that he doesn't want the Pharaoh around, but he basically wants the Pharaoh to be able to go into the afterlife without feeling like he's leaving Yugi defenseless. He doesn't want the Pharaoh to think that Yugi needed him and that he should stay out of the afterlife. Basically tying up the final loose end the Pharaoh needs tied up in order to feel like he can rest peacefully in the afterlife. And that is the 10 best episodes of Yu-Gi-Oh! According to IMDb. So if you liked this video, go ahead and, absolutely just punch that subscribe button's mouth. And I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching. You okay, pup? Anyway,